You're listening to the Love Over Addiction podcast.
Hi, thank you so much for agreeing to share your story. So I like to ask everyone kind of the same question. How did you meet your husband, and when did you know there was a problem?
Sure. So thank you firstly so much for having me. This is such a good opportunity for me to tell my story, and hopefully it'll be cathartic for me. I first met my husband, it's almost 20 years ago now, and I was 22. I had just graduated from college. I had gotten my healthcare degree, and I had moved back to my hometown. I grew up in a small suburb in the Northeast, and a girlfriend and I one night decided to go out, and in the suburbs there's not too many places to go, but we went and we found our little local pub, and I met my husband there. Irony of all ironies, I met my husband who struggles with alcohol in a bar. But that was it. And he owned it was a small restaurant, and he with the bar as like the mainstay, and he co-owned it at the time. So we went, and I got to know him that way, and I would say the first 6 months we were good friends, and then it developed into more than that, and we started dating, and we had a blast. We had a great time.
What was it that initially attracted you to him?
Yeah, so my husband is one of those guys who everybody wants to be around him. He is so much fun, and he makes people feel at ease. You're always laughing when you're around him. He's just great, and I think he just drew me in. I'm telling you, we had a ball. We had such a good time together, and he's a very warm and caring and gregarious person, I would say. So we just clicked, and we had a lot of the same interests. We both like to work out. We go to the gym. We both like to have fun. We're both very family oriented. So we found that, we had a lot in common, and we loved each other's company. And, I just saw this guy who seemed to be able to do it all. He had a business that he co-owned, and he had a second job, and he had paid off his student loans, and he drove a new car, and he seemed to be able to, he seemed to me at the time to be balanced and just a great all-around guy, and drew me right in. And so, we had a great time. And at the time, my parents were divorcing after 39 years of marriage. Very, very, very super toxic marriage. The divorce was long overdue. And I was super hoping to find my person and create a stable and loving and safe harbor for myself. I know a lot of women who grew up in, toxic households feel that way, but that was absolutely me 100%. So I think it sort of pushed me to have this, what I think now is like an anxious attachment. I threw everything into our relationship, and I just went with it.
And what do you mean by when you say you threw everything, like all of your attention, all of your dreams?
Yeah, right. All of my attention. I didn't realize at the time, our social circle, for me, I think my story is a little maybe unique in the fact that our social circle centered around the bar and around the restaurant because it was his business. So our friends, my friends, became, it orbited around that restaurant. And so I didn't have a balance of other things I like to do. I started to sort of neglect my other interests, and it really, everything started centering around him and his likes and our mutual friends there. And we had a great time, and it was a good time, but I think I lacked, I'm sure other healthy and balanced 22-year-olds were maybe traveling before they settle down and, exploring their interests and doing stuff. And I was gung-ho to settle down and get married and have kids and do this career that I had worked really hard to earn my degree, and I was ready for it. I thought, this is my future. That's what I really want.
I know you've done a lot of work on yourself. I know you've done a lot of therapy. Did you ever, discuss what the anxiety was about? Because I know anxious attachment. I know a lot about that. Did you ever, figure out what was it that you were anxious about?
Sure, yeah. So I think, my home was, I didn't know anything about alcohol. My parents didn't have alcohol in the house. It was not that type of dysfunction. I have my mother has very strong narcissistic tendencies. And so I never really knew how we were going to be until I was home and what night it was going to be, right? I never really I based how I was based off of how things at home were. If things at home were calm, I was good. If things at home were fighting and unstable and the threat of divorce was always there, I think my mother must have threatened divorce. I mean, I don't know how many times growing up, and never followed through with it. We moved overseas at one point, and my father was not supposed to come with us, and last minute came. So it was a lot of bracing yourself and then nothing happening, and bracing yourself and then nothing happening. And so the anxiety, I think, honestly came from wanting to create a safe place for myself that I could control, and I could, maybe not control is the right word, but that I could, make more even keel. I wanted it
secure.
to be
that was secure.
Right. Right. So I think that that's where that came from. I mean, I'm still doing a lot of work on this. I'm still learning things the more I go, for sure.
That's wonderful.
I think at this, at the time I was so desperate to have my own family, and that was a void, right? It was a total void that I was desperately trying to fill. And I did. I picked a great guy. I picked a wonderful guy. He just, where life took us was pretty tough, pretty horrifying.
So everything was based around the activities. You lost interest in and lost yourself a little bit, because you were wrapped up in this man and creating this future for yourself, which is totally understandable. I think all of us can relate to that. So it's now becoming about this restaurant, aka bar. When did you start to realize, oh no, or see red flags, or start to get worried? And what did you tell yourself?
Right. So this is such a hard question to answer. When I met my husband, I was in my early 20s. The first few years, and early 20s in American culture, it's so acceptable for excessive alcohol use. I don't think I saw anything at the time that was very different from when I looked at my other peers and my other, friends. I didn't see anything really off kilter at the time. I think it wasn't until a few years, 2 years after we met, we moved in together. We were married after 5 years. I think I did not see red flags until we started having children. We started, we bought our first home, so we had a mortgage. We added one child. 2 years later, we added another, added another child. And I started to notice at the time, I just thought, a lot of people outgrow this. They outgrow the drinking. They outgrow the sort of immature, priorities. And I thought, is he outgrowing it or is he not outgrowing it? It was very hard to see at that point. I think what I noticed at that time was that I was really starting to overfunction. You could find me painting a room or cleaning out a garage. I think on one of my maternity leaves, I had the baby in a, like a pole swing, like a standing frame swing while I was loading a dumpster. I was cleaning out on my maternity leave. And thinking that, I just could do anything. I was really proud of the fact that I could get all this stuff done. As opposed to like thinking that I should have a partner that would help with those responsibilities, those kind of things. I didn't see the underfunctioning as an alcohol issue. I think I saw it as, although it was, I saw it as like a character issue or an immaturity issue. So years went on and, we ultimately bought our forever home, and I think I want to say it was around 2018. We were in the forever home. Our kids were 2 and 4 at the time, and my husband had always had a second job, and it was a sales job. So lots of stress, lots of flexibility, and I mean, he didn't have to punch a clock, right? So he made his own schedule, his self-starter, and I started to notice that he was just always negative. There were some behavior changes that I saw. Very resentful. It was so slow though. It was hard to put a finger on, and I was just thinking, is this life stress that he doesn't seem to be able to handle? I couldn't quite put my finger on it. And somewhere along the line, I started to realize that when he drank vodka, we always ended up arguing. But if he had wine, it was okay. And it's funny, the things we don't see in front of us, right? But I started to say, okay, no more vodka in the house. I can't. There's something you just can't seem to, it just changes you. And he agreed. He said, no problem. That's okay. And, I had some false assurances at the time as well. We had done a weight loss journey when he was turning 40. We gained weight with our kids. We were up late and not sleeping, and we had both gained a bit of weight. And so we decided to do a weight loss journey together. And at the time, he said, we really shouldn't have alcohol. It's empty calories. And I said, yeah, you're right. And I thought, well, the little voice in the back of my head, my little intuition said, well, if there's a problem, we'll see it. And he was concerned enough to call his doctor and get a prescription in case he started to feel tremulous. And honestly, Michelle, I don't know what I was thinking at that point. I think, I'm a healthcare professional, and I thought, well, we'll see. And then he ended up not needing it. Didn't need it. Now, was he completely abstaining? I'm not sure. But he didn't go into any withdrawals, didn't need to take the medication. We ran a 5K that year. He dropped 40 pounds, and I thought, maybe I'm not seeing what I think might be an unhealthy relationship with alcohol. I don't think I thought he was an alcoholic until we really, he started having some gastric issues. He started vomiting every day. And around the same time, he lost that sales job. And a friend of his was opening up a new restaurant. So he was brought on to launch this restaurant and be basically the day manager / bartender. So now he was working at 2 restaurants. He had sold his restaurant that I met him at, but he stayed on 2 nights a week to bartend. And then he had gone to this new restaurant, so he was bartending and running this during the day. And that was in 2018. And I think that's when I really started seeing things I couldn't ignore anymore, or I couldn't explain away. The behavior changes were really, really rough. He started to get very passive aggressive. He couldn't remember conversations that we had had, and it constantly led to arguments. And my wonderful husband, who was so warm and caring, seemed to not be able to stand me. It was always my fault. It was always, I was labeled aggressive and, nagging, and, and it was such a change from how we had started. And we had been through so much together. I thought, this is no longer marital. Like, I think something's really wrong here. But ultimately, and the denial was just so amazing at the time. He was really starting to get to the point where he he was throwing up daily, and never missed a day of work. I never found him in, a sea of bottles that I had to clean up. I never had to call and apologize for his behavior the next day. Never. My husband was very high functioning.
Mm-hmm.
And quite often he came home from work after I was already asleep and after the children were already asleep. Not every night, but most nights.
Mm-hmm.
And I started to notice that I would hear him stumbling around downstairs, stumbling to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night. And finally one night I had to be up at 5 I'm a healthcare professional. I work in a hospital, and I had to be up really early. And he stumbled into our master closet. We have like a walk-in closet. And I thought, what on earth is wrong with him? And I came in and I turned the lights on, and I found him like clinging to the clothes. And he was so disoriented. He didn't know where he was. And I thought, okay, this is like getting to the point where this is like a health issue now. I'm really, I was starting to get really concerned. The next day, he denied that it was really an issue. He shut right down. And it was horrifying because I was seeing him starting to decline in front of me.
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately he went to the doctor, and he was convinced it was going to be something with his stomach and this wonderful doctor, thank God, said to me, and at the time he was so under functioning, he said, well, just tell my wife whatever, and she's the medical one. And so I think he didn't think it was anything to do with alcohol. So the office called me and said, we ran a bunch of blood work and they had done ultrasounds and tests, and they said, this is not autoimmune. It's not infectious. This is alcoholic liver disease. And if he does not abstain completely, he's going to be a very sick man very soon. And thank God for them, because it was for whatever reason, that was the smoking gun I needed. I'd seen all these things. I was worried about things, but I couldn't quite have the confidence in myself to say, like, this is exactly what this is.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was really, for me, I needed that. I needed that independent professional to say, you're not crazy. This is what this is, And so that was great. That was in November of 2019. And, when I sat him down and told him, it was November, right? So here we come right up to the holidays. I thought, oh, okay. And, it was so crazy. He went, how you sometimes hear of like emotions flashing over people's faces. Like, he immediately was angry. He was very angry, and he was very, almost like this look of disdain for me. And then very quickly, he completely broke down and started to cry, and it was a complete look of fear that I had really never seen on his face. And then as fast as that passed, it was calculating, like, okay, I have a bottle of wine left in the house, and then I'll have one glass. And I had said to him, you have a bottle of wine left. When we're done, we're done. I said, now that I know this, right, now that I know that this is what this really is, I cannot watch you go into this any further. And I'm right there with you. We'll do this together, but I can't sit back and say nothing about it and be quieted anymore. So he agreed, totally agreed. And we had that prescription for Ativan for withdrawals from years past, previously. And he called the physician's office, and they said, yeah, you can still use it. That's okay. And sure enough, he went into full-blown withdrawals. It was the most awful thing I'd ever seen.
Really?
And vomiting, cold sweats saturated the bed. It was so horrific to see someone who you just love with everything you have, and you've had children with this person, and you just feel I felt a lot of sympathy for him at that point. I thought this must be horrific, right, to be going through. And so that was November, and it was 5 days of at-home medication. We did not tackle at that point, you can't go work in the bar. You can't go. He could not mentally do that. He could not do a 180 in his mind. And he still, I think, I know for sure at that time he was not calling himself an alcoholic. This was a health issue, and we were just going to deal with the health issue. Mm-hmm. And I thought to myself, we're in some trouble here. So January of 2020, I immediately put myself into counseling. I researched and I found a wonderful woman who's local to me who specializes in substance abuse. Mm-hmm. And it was independent counseling for me because growing up, I knew domestic violence and I knew emotional abuse and I knew a little bit about narcissism, but I didn't know anything about alcoholism. I did not know what to do with this or how to mm-hmm. help this, and this wonderful woman was just so great at pulling the focus actually back to me, mm-hmm. And helping me really to define what I could control and what I couldn't control. And the next several months, it was the darkest valley I've ever walked through. My wonderful husband, who I just love more than anything, did and said things that I just never, ever thought he would do. Never saw us in the positions that we were in. And my counselor at the time, she was just a godsend. She would just walk me through everything, and really helped me to define boundaries. I had never really done that. So she, and I didn't know that I didn't do that either. So she helped me to remember my voice and my likes and my preferences and my, my boundaries basically and soup to nuts really. Mm-hmm. So that was great. She helped me with that. So many things in the marriage had just, I don't even know what the word is to describe it, but everything, my husband was resentful about everything. Even our intimate life was so skewed by this. It became something that he was very passive aggressive about. I became part of his addiction, which I did not understand. I just, it was almost like sex was like a to-do. And if I was tired or if I was busy, our children were growing at that point, and I had, soccer and ballet and, and I worked full time. It just seemed like it went from something that was something we both enjoyed to being something that, quite honestly, the alcohol was impeding. Mm-hmm. And then the frustration was making him very resentful, and everything was my fault. I don't know if other women have that, but it was such a terrible thing, and I kept thinking something's wrong with me. Something's got to be wrong with me, and had nothing to do with me, actually. It was everything to do with the alcohol.
Yeah.
So she helped me, the counselor, the independent counseling. I can't underline enough how she helped clarify these things. I couldn't see it myself. I had a lot of guilt about the fact that I'm a healthcare professional and I didn't see what was in front of me. I knew when I hugged him, I could feel this mild tremor, but I just assumed something, I don't know what I assumed. It was so mild. I thought maybe that's him. Maybe that's, I don't really know what that is. And, you put all these things together in hindsight and you're like, oh, for goodness sake, how did I not, see it? But it's hard. As healthcare professionals, I think, we're caregivers and we get really frustrated when we can't diagnose someone or see something. And full disclosure, I'm not a nurse. I'm not a physician. I have a clinical specialty. I work in a hospital, but I'm not a diagnostician. But I still thought I should.
We have doctors in our community that are, we have doctors, therapists, psychiatrists, psychologists, nurses in our community that love someone struggling with addiction. I think that saying "love is blind," there's some truth to that. We don't want to believe that the ones we love are capable or willing or, in such a bad place, because it's very scary. So I don't think we should judge ourselves for not feeling that or not noticing or waking up. But I do think it's common. We all probably struggle with that. So where are things now? How did they, what's the ending to this story? I'm trying to know.
So my husband, ultimately things really went off the rails probably in April. COVID-19 hit.
Mm-hmm.
So I found myself as a frontline healthcare worker in a hospital at that time with a husband who was actively failing. He went from being a really high functional alcoholic to being a completely non-functional alcoholic. And
Wow.
he was very, very, I'm very happy that I had learned in a few months, I really learned how to put some boundaries into place and then enforce them when they were not being respected. So in 6 very short months, really 4, my husband was asked to leave the home. He moved back home with his parents. He was coming on the weekends to see the children. He came home inebriated and tried to put the children in a car, which resulted in the police department being called. I called the police at that point, defining a boundary. And it helped, it was traumatic. It was awful. My youngest was home. It was just absolutely terrible. And ultimately, he had gone into counseling. He was agreed to see a counselor. He was recommended to do an IOP. He never seemed to be able to get it done. He was failing every step basically. And I don't know if other women have done this, but I just didn't care. My gloves were off. My girls, I was determined to show my girls what you don't stay for and what you don't stand for. And so I thought it's going to be ugly. It's going to be so ugly. It's going to be terrible, but I can put my head down at night knowing that I've done everything I could do. And I didn't half-ass it, So I ultimately called his counselor and said, I know you can't share any information with me, but I have some information for you. And so, because he lied to every counselor. He lied to every intake person. And so I just followed up and said, I'm going to give you a lot of information. You may or may not want it, but here it is. And so his counselor ended up being fantastic. And we basically ended up doing sort of an organic intervention. It didn't mean it to be an intervention, but it had gotten to the point where it was right after the police were called. It was now, and I was documenting everything because I thought there's a real chance that I'm going to be by myself here, and I had consulted a lawyer. I needed to, I had not a dime to my name independently, but I was like, I just have to figure this out. My higher power is going to go ahead of me, and we're going to figure this out. And I think I just had that ammunition in terms of documentation, and I was checking all the boxes I knew to do. And that Stay and Go program, the Stay or Go program that you did, I had bought that, and I just poured myself into it. And it was just such a great thing because it really helped me to put down on paper. I'm now a big fan of journaling, which I never was before. But I put down on paper what I wanted my life to look like, and what, with the month that he was out of the house that I had asked him to leave, it was so peaceful and it was so calming, and I just poured myself into it. Like, this is what it should look like all the time. Ultimately, I had a very good friend who was very close friends with us, who was a social worker and also a substance abuse counselor. And she did her own intervention with him at his parents' home. And then I ended up doing an intervention with him, with his counselor. And I just said, it's going to, you have to go to rehab or I'm going to file. It is what it is. And he agreed to go. So he went to an inpatient rehab. I think he was gone for, I don't know, a little bit over a month. It was 30 days and change, 35, 37 days, and fought it the whole way. I had counselors, I was in contact with them, and they were great. And he just, they said, wow, he's a real boundary pusher. I said, yes, he is.
That's a nice thing.
So they did. They said, he really has a thing with boundaries. Yes, he does.
Yeah.
And
that's great.
But I just surrounded myself with a team. That's all I can say. That's what I did. I was very honest with his family, and I had amazing backing. So between your program, your podcast, which I found, the Stay or Go program, my independent counselor, I did Al-Anon, and then COVID-19 hit. And so I had no physical person. There were call-ins. I felt about that. I kind of couldn't. It depended on the call. Some calls were great. Some calls I was like, I can't. I'm not getting anything out of this. But ultimately, he did rehab. I did not allow him to come straight home. You know, my girls at the time, quite frankly, were traumatized. They saw this man that they loved. My husband also is a fantastic father and has been. He was always a fantastic father, even through his alcohol use. He just was not present. Not present, not retaining things. You know, but they saw this person treat their mother so horrifically. And at one point, you know, one of my boundaries was that if he was intoxicated, he had to leave. I made this boundary when
he respected
wasn't
that?
quite
Did
thinking.
he respect?
No. So that was
that would be
not at all. I was new to boundaries.
The first
okay,
time
I was new.
so that's awesome.
So yeah, I thought this is a great boundary, and you know, of course, the day came, and he was like, "I'm not going anywhere," and I thought, "Oh, I didn't think that went all the way through." So the next boundary I had was that I would be able to leave, and I would take the girls, and that boundary was not respected. Which is why ultimately he was asked to leave the home. He blocked every doorway, and I didn't get to the point where it was like, pack a bag and my husband was never abusive. I will say right now, he's never been physically abusive ever. However, he blocked every doorway, and he was so terribly manipulative in front of the children. And we made it to the car, and then he pulled the back hatch of my SUV open and stood behind the car and threatened to call the police that I was taking the children. And, you know, my youngest at the time was, I want to say she was like 9, and she wet her pants. She was so frightened. It was so horrific. And 40 minutes he held us in the driveway and wouldn't let us leave. And I just got my counselor on the phone and put it on Bluetooth, and I wanted it documented, and it was so traumatic and horrific. But,
of course,
yeah, it was pretty awful. I got my kids into counseling a little bit.
Good for you. That's great.
Yeah. We actually did it with his counselor. And so it was great because they got a chance to go in and talk to him and write letters. They wrote letters to my husband. And then the three of them were able to sit down with me there in an outside room and discuss, you know, what their fears were and what their feelings were at the time. And it was necessary. I think it was really hard, but it was really, really necessary. So I did not allow him to come home when he first came home from rehab. My 10-year-old calls it camp, when he went to camp. And we've made this a family thing best we could.
Sure. That's great. That's great.
And I'm trying to think. So then he went and did an IOP. One of my boundaries was that he could not return to the work that he came from. So he left both jobs.
Will you explain really quickly what an IOP is? Because I know people
Sure, yeah, of course. Yeah. So an IOP is an intensive outpatient. So it's often used as a transition when someone comes out of an inpatient substance abuse program. And it is intensive, just like it stands for. It's several hours, 5 days a week for, I believe it was 6 weeks. And so they encourage AA meetings at night. You know, there was sort of this laundry list of things that he needed to do. He did counseling, and we did not do any marital counseling until that IOP was done. His independent counseling was maintained. So he sort of, once he was like really holding his own and doing everything that he was asked to do, we sort of integrated him back in. And it was awkward a little bit, and it was incredibly stressful, and I was, you know, on pins and needles for sure. I actually also ended up getting referred by the marital counselor for, I'm going to mess this up. I always mess this up. EMDR. Yeah. EMDR counseling.
Yeah, you gotcha. Yeah.
Yeah. So I did that, and for trauma processing, I was, you know, I was doing everything. I was leaning on all my people, and I still was riddled with anxiety. Half of my face was numb for 2 weeks, and I had never had anything like that. I had never had anxiety to that degree.
Yeah.
And when I had facial numbness, I thought, this could kill me. I really need to get a hold of this. So I did that, which I still do every other week. My husband is amazing. He's doing great so far.
Is he sober?
He is sober. We're sober. He came home in July of 2020. The holidays were tough. We had a couple of flips. He had a couple of flips at the holidays.
There you go.
I wasn't going to say anything. Still doing my work.
I loved your caption. Good job. Good job.
Still doing my work. But he, here we are coming up onto another holiday season, and I have a couple of phrases that I've really adopted. Stay in your lane is one of them, and his sobriety is not my job. And it doesn't really have too much to do with me at all. I'm supportive. I do a lot of listening. I don't do any directing. And I really try hard to do my self-care. So I'm doing things that I'm super interested in that I really didn't put attention to before.
Great.
Yeah. I have started my own, I know your podcast was great talking about finances here and there. Mm-hmm. And so, I have a little stash that I put, a little bit of money in every week, and it's just there, and I things are going great right now. I'm staying right now, but I'm well aware now from the past few years that God willing, if we are married at 50, if we are married at 70, I will still be married to an alcoholic. So this is a lifetime deal. It does not mean that I, stay or I put up with anything or but I'm aware that he works his program. I work my recovery. I call it recovery because it feels like I'm recovering from trauma. But, really, it's truly like I've been through a storm or something.
Totally.
Yeah.
That is so helpful. Heather, I'm so proud of you. I really think this is wonderful. And I'm not saying it's wonderful because he's sober. I'm saying it's wonderful because of where you're at today.
Yeah.
That's what's wonderful. It sounds like the way you took care of your girls, the way that you found your resources, created your team, and also you're staying, but your eyes are wide open. You're completely aware. You're not in denial.
Mhm. Right. Right.
I
can't imagine going back to the life we were living. What's really awful is when you see how bad it was, when you have something to compare it to, you're like, oh my God, how was I breathing in that environment? How was I surviving in that? It was just, it's a crazy thing to look back on. But it's not pretty. I definitely have days where I'm triggered by certain things, and especially, the holidays are coming up, and we've had really good conversations, but they don't sound like, what do you need? What can we do for you? They sound like, it's coming up on Thanksgiving and Christmas, and I really need for you to be able to talk to me if you're having a hard time. My husband was never upfront about his drinking, and when he did relapse the two times, and I think that there's variations on relapses. My counselor had said something to me once, and I'm not recalling it right now. I'm so sorry, but it was the one time, and then they realized that they screwed up, but they were not, but my husband was not forthcoming with it. I learned his tells, right? My husband doesn't walk the same way when he's had something to drink. There's a personality change, like someone flipped a light switch. So it became very clear when he had something to drink. And he still does meetings, 5 days a week. He does a men's support group, which is great. And he has a sponsor, which is wonderful. But, we still work on conversations and we work on communicating because the alcohol was sort of a symptom of something else, so we still work on a lot of stuff, and it's been a year since a relapse, relapse, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
But that's still really early to me. When maybe I'll feel, not that I'm not calm, but maybe I'll feel more confident or more comfortable 5 years down, 10 years down. I don't know what the number is. I don't think there is a number, to be honest. But I'm just aware
Well,
that,
I think the word you're looking for is secure.
Yeah.
You're looking for that security because you're still anxious. I mean, and that's okay. I think a lot of women get tripped up, especially when their loved one, their partner gets sober. We think automatically, okay, we need to feel better. Like, this is repaired. This is fine.
Right.
What we've been asking for is finally fixed. And so now we need to jump right into feeling good all the time and happy and grateful and happy and grateful. And first of all, nobody's happy and grateful no matter who you're married to or partnering with, number one. And number two is that I always love to do the math, and this is not scientific, but there's absolutely zero proof to this theory. So take it for what you want it. But however long you were married to this person or in a relationship with this person, you divide it by half, and that's how long it's going to take you to feel secure in your relationship again, only if they are consistently sober. If they relapse, you are back to zero again, unfortunately.
Yeah, no, I agree.
But
I completely agree with that.
Yeah, I think it's okay that you're not. I think it would be so unrealistic for anyone to place those expectations on ourselves for jumping back into loving, grateful, open-hearted, and secure, right away. So I love that that you are still trying and that this is something that you are participating in with really healthy boundaries. Sounds really great. How are your girls doing?
My girls are good. They're great, actually. They, if anything, what's really fantastic about this is my girls are now 12 and 10. And they are, this is the stuff that we talk about. And they were not, when this all was happening, they weren't young enough that they were sort of oblivious, but they weren't old enough to be emotionally mature enough to fully understand and handle it. When it was happening, my oldest was going through that DARE program. I don't know if that's like a national program, but it's this like
it is
drug and alcohol. Okay. So it's this, and she was going through it at the time. And so I did a lot of talking to her about, and to the little one, that this was like an illness that Dad has. And he really, all these meetings help him stay healthy. And when he went away to rehab, it was so that he could really get the medical help that he needed. And we've used this sort of as a, I don't want to say example, but kind of as like a, everyone needs help at some point. And it's really important to be able to ask for help if you're feeling sad or if you're feeling, lonely or angry or, they're all healthy emotions. But when they start, you need to be able to talk about things. So we use that as kind of a launching pad for sort of as they enter these like teen years. And we're continuing to do it. And
that's great.
I know some women continue to drink with husbands who are alcoholics and they do it with their friends. For me, I just can't. I felt like it was confusing, or it would be confusing for my girls. So I stopped right along with them, and I think it sent a good message to them, because I think they're still in that age range where it's like, but you can, but he can't, but I, it seems gray. They're still in a little bit of that black and white, mentality. So, we just, they're good though. They're great. They're doing sports and he's there. I think they're so thrilled that he is okay, because for a good amount of time, they were well aware that their lives may be different. There was a divorce that was potentially going to happen. And so that, there was no sugarcoating that. There was no hiding anything. These things happened, unfortunately, a few things happened in front of them. And I had not a lot of control over that. I felt very much as a hostage when things were sort of, I had soft targets in the house. Do you know what I mean by that? And it was very hard to have a full reaction when I had children that was, that were watching. So they are not without their battle scars, but we've really tried hard to talk about all of them. And that, you know, even though it's a parent, parents are human and they make mistakes. And that it's important to just get help if you need to. My littlest one, you know, is like, oh, you're going to a meeting again? And, you know, that's all he needs sometimes to say, well, I wish I could stay home and I would rather stay home. But she understands that, you know, to stay healthy and to stay, you know, okay, this is necessary. So that's kind of where we're at with it. Yeah. So onward and upward, and we just keep going, and hopefully it stays this way. But if it doesn't and something happens again, I will not be in pieces. You know, I will sort of be that much more prepared to say, okay, I know what this is now, and I know my boundaries, and it won't be such an hopefully it will not be such an anxiety-provoking experience, you know, because now I know the devil I'm working with, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I say congratulations to you, because this sounds like a victory story to me. And I'm really proud of you for all the work you're doing. Well done. And for mostly like for communicating with your girls. You're empowering them. And I think that you're taking a tragedy, something that, you know, for whatever reason is affecting your family, and you're using it to help educate them, and that's tremendous. When we talk to our kids, I think that is one of the most important things we can do. So well done.
Right. Well, thank you so much. And thank you so much for all the work that you do with this. I swear your podcast just centered me every Sunday. Just centered me, which, you know, I needed. I so desperately needed in a time that was really terrible. So thank you. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Well, you're welcome. I really appreciate you sharing your story.
This podcast is created for your support, encouragement, and entertainment with my personal thoughts and beliefs. We are bonded together by the fact that we love someone suffering from addiction. This is not intended as a substitute for therapy or advice from a professional.